The Atlantic Ocean is calm. Steel gray waters stretch endlessly beneath an empty sky. Radar screens glow softly aboard American warships. Somewhere, beyond the horizon, Soviet vessels are moving south, carrying cargo that could end the world. No shots have been fired. No war has been declared. Yet every man on deck knows the truth. If a single mistake is made, there will be no second chance. In October 1962, the Cold War stops being abstract. It is no longer ideology, speeches, or proxy wars in distant lands. It becomes immediate, physical, measurable in miles and minutes. At the center of this crisis is Cuba, a small island 90 miles away from Florida. After Fidel Castro's revolution in 1959, Cuba has moved decisively into the Soviet sphere. For Washington, this is an insult. For Moscow, an opportunity. By 1962, the Soviet Union had begun secretly deploying nuclear missiles to Cuba, medium-range ballistic missiles, capable of reaching Washington, New York, and most of the continental United States. Flight time, minutes. On October 14, 1962, an American U-2 reconnaissance aircraft photographs missile sites under construction. The images reach the White House 2 days later. President John F. Kennedy stares at the photographs in silence. There is no doubt the Soviet Union has crossed a line. The question is not whether the United States will respond, but how. Kennedy's advisors split into factions: airstrikes to destroy the missile sites, a full-scale invasion of Cuba, diplomatic pressure, or a naval blockade. Airstrikes risk missing hidden missiles. An invasion risks nuclear war with the Soviet Union. Kennedy chooses a third option, one that sounds restrained but carries enormous risk. He calls it a quarantine. A naval blockade. No Soviet offensive weapons will be allowed to reach Cuba. This is a challenge, issued not in words, but in ships. The United States Navy moves with astonishing speed. Within days, a massive force assembles in the Atlantic and Caribbean. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, cruisers, submarines. The line will stretch across the approach to Cuba. Any Soviet vessel carrying military cargo will be stopped, boarded, and turned back. This is not a drill. Each encounter risks escalation. On the evening of October 22, 1962, Kennedy addresses the nation. His voice is calm, measured, but the message is unmistakable.
Third, it shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
The blockade will begin in days. The world listens. Moscow listens. And Soviet ships are already at sea. Aboard American destroyers, sailors study charts of the Caribbean. They memorize rules of engagement: no firing unless fired upon, no escalation without orders, identify ships visually, maintain radio contact. They know the names of the vessels they may soon confront. They know some of those ships may be armed. They know some may be carrying nuclear warheads. And they know that hesitation could be fatal. By October 24th, the quarantine line is in place. It is invisible, but it may as well be a wall of fire. Beyond it, Soviet merchant ships steam towards Cuba. Among them, SS Kimovsk, SS Garginin, SS Poltavia, SS Alexander Zhivsky, escorted by Soviet submarines. Every mile they close tightens the noose. The U.S. Navy waits. Radar sweeps the horizon. Sonar listens beneath the waves. In Washington, Kennedy and his advisors stare at clocks. In Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev wades pride against survival. No one knows who will blink. At dawn, October 24th, 1962, the Atlantic has become a chessboard. Not metaphorically, literally. Across hundreds of miles of open ocean, the United States Navy positions its pieces with precision. Each ship assigned a sector, each commander briefed on a single overriding mission: stop the missiles, avoid war. The quarantine line is drawn roughly 500 miles from Cuba, arching across the Atlantic approaches. This is not a wall. It is not mined. It exists only because armed men agree to enforce it. The scale of the operation is staggering. By late October, the United States has committed more than 180 Navy vessels to the crisis. Key surface forces include USS Enterprise, CVN-65, the world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier; USS Independence, CVA-62, USS Essex, CV-9, USS Randolph, CV-15. These carriers project air power over the Caribbean. Their jets, armed and fueled. Pilots sleeping beside their aircrafts. Destroyers form the backbone of the blockade itself. USS Gearing, DD-710, USS Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., DD-850, USS Barry, DD-933, USS Pierce, DD-753. Their job is simple and terrifying. They will be the first to meet Soviet ships. The men aboard these ships carry live ammunition, but they also carry strict orders. The rules are precise. Identify the ship visually and by radio. Request course, cargo, and destination. Order the vessel to stop. If it refuses, escort it away. Board only with presidential authorization. No warning shots, no aggressive maneuvers, no room for interpretation. A single nervous captain could start a war. Admiral George Anderson, Chief of Naval Operations, makes it clear: you will not fire unless fired upon, and God help us if that happens. Meanwhile, the Soviet merchant ships continue south. They are not warships, but many carry military cargo. Among the most closely watched vessels, SS Kimovsk, SS Gargin, SS Poltavia, SS Alexander Zhivsky, SS Vysl Kutatov. Their manifests are classified. Their intentions are suspected. Some carry construction equipment. Some carry missile components. Some may carry nuclear warheads. None will admit it. They steam forward at a steady speed until orders arrive from Moscow. On the morning of October 24th, radar operators aboard U.S. destroyers notice something remarkable. Several Soviet ships slow. Then, one by one, they alter course. SS Kimovsk turns northeast. SS Gargin reduces speed and drifts. Others follow. They do not cross the line. In Washington, relief mixes with dread. Because not all ships turn back. One vessel continues towards the quarantine zone, SS Bucharest. American destroyers move to intercept. Radio messages crackle across the Atlantic. Unidentified Soviet vessel. This is the United States Navy. State your cargo and destination. The Bucharest responds calmly. No missiles, they claim. No offensive weapons. After tense deliberation, Kennedy allows it to pass. The blockade is firm, but not absolute. The world sees restraint. What the world cannot see lies beneath the waves. The Soviet Union had deployed 4 diesel-electric submarines to the Caribbean, known to NATO as Foxtrot-class submarines. They include B-4, B-36, B-59, B-130. Each is armed with conventional torpedoes. At least one carries a nuclear tip torpedo. The American Navy does not know this yet. The submarines slip silently towards the blockade zone, running on batteries, conserving power, listening. They are hot, cramped, low on air, and under enormous pressure. American destroyers begin anti-submarine patrols. Ships like USS Beale, DD-471, and USS Cony, DD-408, deploy sonar buoys. They listen. They hear something. A contact. Orders are given to signal, not attack. Practice depth charges, small explosive charges, are dropped to force submarines to the surface. To the Americans, this is a warning. To the Soviets below, it feels like an attack. And they do not know whether war has begun already. For hours, then days, the ocean becomes a place of waiting. Soviet captains wait for orders. American commanders wait for mistakes. Presidents wait for the phone to ring. The blockade holds. Missiles do not arrive. But tensions tighten with every passing hour. A single misread sonar ping, a single misinterpreted radio call, and the Cold War would turn hot in minutes. Never before had so much destructive power been balanced on such restraint. No cannon fire, no torpedoes launched, no shots fired in anger, just ships, steel hulls, men watching each other across empty water. The blockade is working, but the most dangerous moment is still ahead, beneath the sea. The ocean does not announce confrontation. There are no drumbeat, no warning horn, just a blip on a radar, a bearing, a closing distance. On October 25, 1962, American destroyers on the quarantine line received new contacts. Soviet vessels still approaching Cuba. This time, they do not turn away. Aboard USS Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., DD-850, officers lean over charts as radar confirms the track of a Soviet freighter heading southwards. Speed, steady. Course, unchanged. The orders come down the chain. Intercept, identify, challenge. American destroyers do not charge forward. They slide. They angle themselves ahead of the Soviet ship's bow, forcing a decision. If the Soviet captain maintains course, he will collide. If he slows, he submits. If he turns, he yields the ocean. The destroyers hold position. Radio signals go out in English and Russian. Soviet vessel, you are approaching a quarantine zone. State your cargo and intentions. Minutes pass. No response. The distance closes. At 1,000 yards, the Soviet freighter finally responds. The voice is calm, controlled. Cargo, industrial equipment. Destination, Havana. The American commander knows the rules. No boarding without presidential authorization. No firing unless fired upon. He orders his ship to shadow, not block. The freighter passes. The line holds. But the psychological battle deepens. Not all encounters end this way. Several Soviet vessels, under contact with U.S. naval units, reverse course entirely. SS Poltov slows, then alters, heading north. SS Alexander Durovsky turns away after radio challenge. SS Kutov halts forward movement entirely. Each turn is logged. Each turn sends a message to Washington and Moscow alike. The blockade is real and is being enforced. Above the surface, American aircraft patrol relentlessly. From USS Enterprise, fighter jets roar off the deck every few minutes. Their mission? Identify ships visually, photograph decks and cargo holds, show presence. Low passes over Soviet vessels are deliberate. A reminder, you are being watched. Soviet captains record these flyovers in their logs. They do not respond, but they remember. Despite the show of force, Kennedy remains cautious. He refuses to order forcible boarding unless absolutely necessary. Why? Because boarding a Soviet ship risked armed resistance, escalation at sea, retaliation in Berlin. Every decision is weighed against the global balance. The blockade is not about dominance, it is about restraint. On both sides, captains operate with incomplete information. American commanders do not know which ships carry missiles, whether submarines are nearby, whether Moscow has authorized resistance. Soviet captains do not know whether the blockade is permanent, whether boarding will occur, whether war has already started. Both sides assume the worst. Both sides choose caution. Late on October 26, an American destroyer detects a Soviet vessel altering course unexpectedly. For minutes, the two ships close rapidly. Collision alarms sound. Engines reverse. Orders are shouted. At the last moment, the Soviet ship veers away. No collision, no shots, but nerves are shredded. A U.S. officer later writes, "I realized how thin the line was. Inches of rudder, seconds of decision. That's all that stood between peace and disaster." By the end of October 26, no Soviet offensive weapons have crossed the line. Most suspected ships have turned back. The world remains intact, but the most dangerous confrontation has not happened on the surface. It has happened below, out of sight, out of breath, and armed with nuclear torpedoes. American sonar operators continue to track contacts. Soviet submarines remain submerged, running low on air, battery power, and patience. They are cut off from Moscow. They do not know if war has begun. They only know that explosions echo through the water, and they are being hunted. At the surface, war was tense. The underwater war was suffocating. 4 Soviet Foxtrot-class diesel-electric submarines had been dispatched towards Cuba before the crisis exploded. B-4, B-36, B-59, B-130. They were built for short patrols in cold northern waters, not prolonged missions in the tropical Atlantic. Inside, temperatures climb above 120 Fahrenheit. Air grew stale. Carbon dioxide levels rose. Men collapsed from heat exhaustion, and still they remained submerged. Communication was almost impossible. Once submerged, Foxtrot submarines could not receive regular radio transmissions. Their captains had no clear updates. What they did not know, whether diplomacy was going on, whether war had already begun, whether nuclear weapons had been used. What they did know was this: American warships were dropping explosives nearby. To the US Navy, these were signal depth charges, small, non-lethal devices meant to force submarines to the surface. To the men below, they sounded like an attack. On October 27th, American destroyers USS Beale and USS Cony detected a submerged contact. It was B-59. The US ships followed protocol. They dropped practice depth charges, loud, violent, but not destructive. Explosions rattled the submarine's hull. Lights flickered, men screamed. Inside B-59, the crew believed war had started. What the Americans did not know, what no one above the surface knew, was that B-59 carried a nuclear torpedo, a real one, armed with a nuclear warhead capable in power to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Soviet rules required authorization from 3 officers to launch it: the captain, the political officer, and the flotilla commander aboard the sub. 2 of the 3 agreed. They believed the submarine was under attack. They believed Moscow was already gone. They prepared the torpedo. The 3rd officer was Vasily Akrapovich. He was flotilla commander. He was exhausted, overheated, and surrounded by chaos. And he refused. Akrapovich argued they had no confirmation of war, that the explosion were signals, not attacks. The launching would guarantee nuclear escalation. For hours, the submarine shook as depth charges continued. Arguments raged. Finally, Akrapovich prevailed. The torpedo was not launched. The submarine surfaced. The world survived without even knowing how close it came to ending. The other Soviet submarines endured the same torment. B-36 was chased for hours by US destroyers and aircraft. B-130 was forced to the surface after battery failure. B-4 narrowly avoided detection. Each crew faced the same conditions: extreme heat, dehydration, psychological collapse. None launched weapons. None fired torpedoes. Restraint, not orders, saved the world. Only years later did the United States learn how close disaster had come. American commanders believed Soviet subs were conventionally armed. Depth charges were harmless signals. Escalation was unlikely. They were wrong. One US officer later admitted, "If we had known they carried nuclear torpedoes, we would have done everything differently." The margin of error had been terrifyingly thin. October 27, 1962, becomes known as Black Saturday. On this day, a U-2 spy plane is shot down over Cuba. US pilots nearly violate Soviet airspace. Nuclear torpedoes are nearly launched at sea. Never before or since has the world come so close to nuclear war. And most of it happened in silence, underwater. One by one, Soviet submarines surfaced, exhausted and defeated. American ships circled them cautiously. No taunts, no cheers, just relief. The blockade continued. The missiles did not arrive. And slowly, the crisis began to break. While ships and submarines stalked each other across the Atlantic, the true battle shifted to paper and words. On October 26, 1962, a long, emotional letter arrived from Nikita Khrushchev to John F. Kennedy. It is personal, rambling, almost desperate. Khrushchev writes not as a revolutionary, but as a man terrified of what is unfolding. If people do not show wisdom now, they will come to the brink of catastrophe. We and you ought not to pull on the ends of the rope in which you have tied a knot of war. He proposes a deal. The Soviet Union will remove its missiles from Cuba. In exchange, the United States will pledge not to invade Cuba. Kennedy reads the letter carefully. It sounds like a compromise. But the next day, October 27th, a second letter arrives. This one is colder, more formal, more dangerous. Now, Khrushchev adds a new demand. The United States must remove its Jupiter nuclear missiles from Turkey. The crisis sharpens. 2 letters, 2 tones, 2 possible paths. Peace or escalation. At sea, the blockade continues to do its work. By October 27th, Soviet ships carrying missile-related cargo have either turned back or stopped. No new offensive weapons are approaching Cuba. The quarantine line holds firm. American naval intelligence confirms ships like SS Poltavia, SS Alexander Dubrovsky, and SS Kirovsky are now heading away from Cuba entirely. This moment is decisive. The blockade has done what airstrikes could not. It has paused history. Every mile a Soviet ship steams north buys diplomats another hour. Inside the White House, Kennedy makes a risky decision. He responds only to Khrushchev's first letter. Publicly, privately, his brother, Robert Kennedy, meets with the Soviet ambassador. The message is simple and secret. The US will remove Jupiter missiles from Turkey, but only quietly, and only after the Cuban missiles are gone. There will be no public admission. Both sides must be able to claim victory. The blockade makes this possible. Without ships advancing, without missiles arriving, there is time to negotiate. On October 28, 1962, Radio Moscow broadcasts Khrushchev's decision. The Soviet Union will dismantle and remove its missiles from Cuba. The announcement is short, controlled, measured. At sea, the reaction is immediate. American commanders receive confirmation. Soviet ships will not challenge the blockade. Missile removal operations will begin. The quarantine will remain until verification is complete. The world exhales. The blockade does not end immediately. American naval aircraft and ships now shift missions, monitoring Cuban ports, photographing missile dismantling, tracking outbound Soviet freighters. Ships like SS Lenin, SS Omsky, SS Krasnoyarsk begin loading missile components for the return voyage. American reconnaissance aircraft fly low over Cuban sites. Crates disappear. Launchers are dismantled. The missiles leave the island the same way they arrived, by sea, but this time under the watchful eye of the US Navy. The quarantine remains in effect until November. Every Soviet ship leaving Cuba is tracked. Every cargo hold scrutinized. Finally, the confirmation complete, the blockade is lifted. No shots fired, no ship sunk, no war declared. The most dangerous naval standoff in human history ends not with an explosion, but with the turn of a helm.